the Night Journey and the New Covenant, Isra Mi'raj and the Pledge of Aqabah, the Legacy Recap. Last episode, we watched the fire ignite and the Quraysh try to stamp it out. We watched Bilal on the burning sand, Sumayya die on a spear, and Umar walk through Makkah's streets with an unsheathed sword, intending murder, and arrive at his sister's door. A changed man. We watched 40 people pray openly at the Aqabah for the first time, flanked by the two most feared warriors in the city. And we watched the Quraysh respond to that defiance with their most extreme weapon yet, 3 years of total social and economic siege, sealing Banu Hashim into a mountain pass with their babies crying from hunger. They waited out the boycott. They survived it. And then, in the same year the siege was finally broken, the Prophet ﷺ lost the two people who had anchored him to the world. Khadija died. Abu Talib died. He went to Ta'if looking for shelter and a new base. The people of Ta'if sent street children after him with stones. He walked miles through that gauntlet, bleeding, and sat under a tree in a garden and prayed, not for revenge, not for relief, but for the patience to keep going if God was not angry with him. He returned to Makkah under borrowed protection. The strategic situation at the close of episode 3 is this. 13 years of preaching have produced a small but extraordinary community. The city that produced them is locked against them. The external base in Abyssinia is secure, but distant. The Prophet ﷺ's two great protectors are dead, and every conventional door to expansion inside Arabia has been tested and refused. Something has to change, and what changes next will not come from human strategy. It will come from above the 7 heavens. The darkest night, try to hold the weight of this moment. 10 years. 10 years of mission. And the balance sheet, by any human accounting, is discouraging. A small community of perhaps a few hundred people. Economically stripped by the boycott. Militarily powerless. Politically isolated. The Prophet ﷺ's household, shattered by grief. His protector gone. His city closed. His alternative city having just thrown stones at him. He is 50 years old. He is living under the borrowed protection of a non-Muslim nobleman whose generosity could end at any moment. The Quraysh have demonstrated over a decade that they will not be reasoned with, shamed or pressured into accepting the message. And the tribes of Arabia, tribe after tribe, season after season, have heard his preaching at the Hajj fairs and turned away. By every external indicator available to a human observer in 620 CE, the mission is in crisis. And it is precisely here, at the lowest point, at the moment of maximum human vulnerability, that Allah the Almighty does something that no general could plan, no diplomat could arrange, and no political strategist could have conceived. He takes his prophet on a journey, not a journey through Arabia, not a journey to another tribe or another city, a journey through time, through space, through the architecture of the cosmos itself, from the holy house in Makkah to the furthest mosque at the end of the earth, and then beyond the earth entirely, up through 7 heavens, past the boundary of human comprehension, to a proximity with the divine that no human being before or since has been given, in a single night. And when the Prophet returns, before the morning is broken, before the city has woken, he carries with him something that will reframe everything that has happened and everything that has happened and everything that is about to happen. He carries the proof that this mission is not a local story. It is not a Hashimi tribal dispute. It is not a Makkan religious disagreement. It is the continuation of every message sent to every prophet since the beginning of human history. And now we need to understand with full analytical precision why this happened when it happened, and what it means for everything that follows. The strategic context of the Isra. Why now? There is a pattern in the prophetic narrative that the careful historian keeps noticing. The deepest divine interventions do not come at the moments of external success. They come at the moments of maximum internal pressure. The first revelation came after years of solitary preparation in a cave. The second revelation, the command to arise and warn, came after weeks of painful silence following the first. And now, after the year of sorrow, after Ta'if, after the borrowed protection and the dead protectors and the closed city, comes this. The sources are clear that the Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj occurred in the 10th year of the prophethood, the same year as the deaths of Khadija and Abu Talib. Some scholars place it in Shawwal, just months after those deaths. The proximity is not accidental. The divine timing is precise. What the Prophet ﷺ needed at this moment was not a new political alliance, not a new military resource, not a new external pressure on the Quraysh. What he needed, and what this night provided, was a complete cosmic reframing of the struggle he was in. He needed to see, with direct experience and not mere faith, that the city of Makkah, with its 360 idols and its stubborn chieftains and its borrowed protection and its street children throwing stones, was a very small theater in a very large story. He needed to stand in Jerusalem, at the site where all the prophets before him had worshipped, and lead them in prayer. He needed to be shown, systematically and directly, that the line of prophethood from Adam to Jesus was a single continuous mission, and that he was its completion. He needed to receive the gift of the 5 prayers, the direct, unmediated daily connection between the believer and Allah, at the place of maximum nearness to the divine. And then he needed to come back and tell the Quraysh what he had experienced. Not because they would believe him, but because their response to the account, their mockery, their disbelief, their demand for proof, would itself serve as a final, definitive sorting mechanism. After this, no one in Makkah could claim they had not been given every opportunity to consider the truth. The Isra and Mi'raj was not an escape from the crisis. It was the preparation for the next phase of the mission, a phase that would require a quality of certainty and a depth of rootedness that only direct divine encounter could provide. With that context established, let us enter the night. The Isra from Makkah to Jerusalem. The Prophet is at rest near the Aqabah. Some accounts say at the house of Hani, others at the Hijr Ismail, the curved enclosure adjacent to the Kaaba itself. The night is quiet. Makkah is asleep. Jibreel appears. A mount is brought. The Buraq, described in the traditions as a white animal, larger than a donkey and smaller than a mule, whose stride reached as far as its eye could see. The Prophet ﷺ mounted, and the journey began. The destination, Masjid al-Aqsa in Jerusalem, the furthest mosque, al-Masjid al-Aqsa, the site of the Temple of Solomon, the site where the prophets of the children of Israel had gathered, prayed, and received revelation for thousands of years. The city where Ibrahim had nearly sacrificed Ismail, the city where Dawood had built his kingdom, the city where Isa had preached and been raised, the city that every Abrahamic tradition recognized as the geographic center of prophethood's history on earth. The Prophet ﷺ arrived. He entered the mosque, and assembled inside, waiting for him, were all the prophets. Every one of them, Adam, Ibrahim, Musa, Isa, and all those sent between them and after them. And Muhammad bin Abdullah, the orphan from Makkah, the man whose own uncle had just publicly cursed him from the steps of the Kaaba, the man whose city had just refused him, was asked to lead them all in prayer. Pause on that. The man the Quraysh called a liar, a poet, a sorcerer, a man possessed, led every prophet in human history in a prayer at the site most sacred to the entire Abrahamic tradition. This moment is the Qur'an's answer, delivered in experiential form, to every question about the legitimacy of the mission. He did not merely receive a message. He was recognized by every carrier of divine revelation before him as the one they had all pointed toward. The prayer concluded, and then the ascent began, the Mi'raj, through the 7 heavens. Jibreel led him upward, the first heaven. The gates opened. He was received. He met Adam, the first man, the first prophet, who greeted him and called him a righteous son and a righteous prophet. On Adam's right, the prophet saw souls, and Adam would look at them and laugh. On his left, souls, and Adam would look at them and weep. These were the souls of his descendants. On his right, the people of paradise. On his left, the people of the fire. The second heaven. He met Yahya and Isa, John the Baptist and Jesus, cousins in lineage, brothers in mission. They greeted him. They acknowledged him. The third heaven. He met Yusuf, Joseph, described in the traditions as having been given half of all beauty. He greeted him. The fourth heaven. He met Idris. The fifth heaven. Harun, Aaron. The sixth heaven. Musa, Moses, who greeted him, and then, when the prophet passed upward, wept. When asked why he wept, Musa said, "I weep because a young man who is commissioned after me will have more of his followers enter paradise than mine." And Moses, the man who had led hundreds of thousands of the children of Israel through the desert, who had spoken to Allah directly, who had given the world its first comprehensive legal code, sat in the sixth heaven and wept because this man from Arabia would surpass him. The seventh heaven. He met Abraham, the father of monotheism, the man whom both the Quraysh and the people of the book claimed as their ultimate ancestor and source of legitimacy. Ibrahim was reclining against the Bayt al-Ma'mur, the heavenly house, the celestial counterpart of the Kaaba, which the traditions record as being circumambulated by 70,000 angels every single day, none of whom would ever return to circumambulate it again before the Day of Judgment. Ibrahim greeted him, and called him a righteous son and a righteous prophet. The man the Quraysh claimed to follow, because they were the guardians of Ibrahim's house, had just been called righteous by Ibrahim himself, in the seventh heaven. And then the lote tree of the utmost boundary, the Sidrat al-Muntaha, the point at which all human comprehension ends, the place beyond which no created being, not even Jibreel, had ever gone. What the Prophet ﷺ saw and experienced beyond that point is described in the Qur'an with a precision that is simultaneously complete and deliberately beyond full verbal capture. He saw the greatest signs of his Lord, and there, at the utmost boundary of created existence, the commandment was given, 50 prayers a day for the believers. The gift negotiated, 50 prayers become 5. What happens next is one of the most humanly remarkable passages in the entire prophetic biography. And I want you to notice not just the theology of it, but the character it reveals. On the descent, passing through the 6th heaven, the Prophet ﷺ encountered Musa again. Musa asked, "What has your Lord commanded for your community?" 50 prayers a day. Musa's response was immediate and practical. "Go back to your Lord and ask for a reduction. I know how people are. I tested the children of Israel and they were unable to bear it." The Prophet ﷺ went back. 10 prayers were reduced. He returned to Musa. Musa sent him back again. This happened multiple times until the commandment was reduced to 5 prayers per day. At 5, Musa still said, "Go back. Even 5 is too much for your people." And the Prophet ﷺ, and this is the moment that reveals everything about the quality of his relationship with Allah, said, "I am too shy to ask again. I accept what my Lord has given." And then the voice came, "These are 5 prayers, but they carry the weight of 50. The word does not change before me. Now let us analyze what just happened." The negotiation of the 5 prayers is not a story about bureaucratic adjustment. It is a story about 3 things simultaneously. First, Moses. The prophet most associated with the giving of commandments and law was the advocate for the human community in the negotiation. The same prophet the Quraysh had accused Muhammad of merely repeating old stories from was, in the 7th heaven, the one working to make the new commandment bearable for Muhammad's followers. Second, the final number 5 was arrived at through a process of divine mercy responding to human limitation. The prayers are not 5 because 5 is the minimum required for faith. They are 5 because 50 were reduced, one negotiation at a time, out of mercy for human beings who would struggle. Third, the prophet's decision to stop asking, "I am too shy to ask again," at precisely 5, reveals that the relationship between this prophet and his Lord was not a relationship of transaction, calculation, or political negotiation. It was a relationship of intimate reverence. He stopped, not because 5 was enough. He stopped because he loved Allah too much to keep asking. And now, carrying all of this, he descended. He returned to Makkah. The night was not yet over, and in the morning, he told what he had seen. The morning after the Quraysh's response and the political cost, the Prophet ﷺ went to the Quraysh and told them where he had been the previous night. Their response was immediate and thunderous. Laughter, disbelief, and a political calculation that the Quraysh made instantly. This was the opportunity they had been waiting for. Here was a claim so extraordinary, so impossible to verify by normal means, so completely outside the framework of anything they could accept, that it could be used to destroy whatever credibility Muhammad still had among the wavering and the undecided. You claim you went from Makkah to Jerusalem and back in a single night? A journey that takes a full month by caravan? And then you went to the heavens? They sent for people who had been to Jerusalem. They demanded the Prophet describe the mosque in detail. Every gate, every column, every feature of a building he had seen only once, in the dark, during a supernatural journey. He described it. He described it accurately, each detail confirmed. They demanded he describe the caravans he had passed on the road. He described them, their positions, their numbers, their livestock, their direction. The caravans arrived in Makkah and confirmed the details. It made no difference, because this was never really about evidence. The Quraysh's rejection of the Isra was not an epistemological failure, a matter of insufficient proof. It was a volitional choice. They had spent 10 years watching a man they unanimously agreed was the most trustworthy person they knew. They had confirmed his trustworthiness in the very moment before he made his first public declaration. They had seen every claim he made about the caravans, about the description of Jerusalem, about the outcomes of conflicts, confirmed by subsequent events. And they still rejected it. The sources record something sobering. Some people who had been weak in their Islam, not yet fully grounded, still holding to partial commitment, heard the account of the Mi'raj and left the faith. The extraordinary nature of the claim was more than they could hold. But Abu Bakr, the man who would be called Al-Siddiq, the affirmer of truth, heard what the Quraysh were saying, and his response became one of the defining moments of his biography. He was told, "Your companion claims he went to Jerusalem and back in a single night." Abu Bakr's answer was instantaneous. If he said it, it is true. No hesitation, no qualification, no, let me investigate. If he said it, it is true. This is not blind faith. This is 15 years of observed evidence producing total trust. Abu Bakr was not affirming a miracle he could not understand. He was affirming a man whose entire life had given him every reason to trust everything that man said. The Quraysh were using the Mi'raj as a weapon to discredit the Prophet. Abu Bakr used it as a final, definitive test of what he himself believed. He passed. The Quraysh failed, and from that morning the sorting was complete. Makkah had been given every opportunity. The people who were going to believe had believed. The people who were going to reject had rejected, and a door that had been standing open for 10 years, the door of Makkah's acceptance, quietly closed. But another door, in a city 400 kilometers to the north, was about to open. The stranger approach, preaching in the darkness, the Hajj season, the 11th year of the prophethood. Makkah fills with pilgrims from across Arabia, caravans from every tribe, every direction. The Prophet moves through these crowds at the pilgrimage season with a mission that is simultaneously urgent and precarious. He preaches Islam to every caravan he can reach. But Abu Jahl and Abu Lahab follow him everywhere, warning the listeners away, calling him insane, calling him a sorcerer, urging people not to listen. So he adapts. He begins going out in the hours of darkness, several miles from the Kaaba itself, to reach the caravans before Abu Jahl and Abu Lahab can intercept him. And on one such night, at a place called Aqabah, a rocky pass just outside Makkah, he hears voices. He moves toward them and sees, in the darkness, 6 men sitting together. They have come from Yathrib, the city that most of Arabia knew as a prosperous date farming settlement, 400 kilometers to the north, home to the Awas and Khazraj tribes, and 3 powerful Jewish tribal confederacies. The Prophet sat with them and preached. He recited the Quran. And something happened in that circle that had not happened in any of the dozens of tribal encounters of the previous years. They listened. They looked at each other. And the sources record the reason they were so immediately receptive. The Jews of Yathrib had been telling the Arab tribes there for years that a prophet was coming. The Jews read their scriptures and they said, "His time is near. When he comes, we will follow him and destroy you as Ad and Iram were destroyed." These 6 men from the Khazraj had grown up hearing this warning. They had never expected to encounter the Prophet himself in a rocky pass outside Mecca on a dark night. But they recognized what they were hearing. They had been half prepared for it by people who ultimately would not accept it. They embraced Islam then and there, all 6 of them. The Prophet gave Rafi' bin Malik written verses of the Quran already revealed, the first written distribution of the Quran to Medina. They departed with a promise. They would go home and preach. 6 men, from a city the Prophet had never visited, going home with a promise. 6 months later, that promise would produce the first formal covenant between the Islamic movement and its future home. The first pledge of Aqabah, 12 men and a mission, the 12th year of the prophethood, the next Hajj season. The Prophet ﷺ went to the same place at Aqabah, looking for the 6 men who had made a promise the previous year. He found them, and they had not come alone. There were 12 men now, from both the Khazraj and the Aus tribes. 5 of the original 6 had returned, 7 new faces. And critically, for the first time, both of Medina's great rival tribes were represented. The ancient blood feud between Aus and Khazraj, which had consumed the city in devastating cycles of war for generations, had not prevented men from both sides coming to the same mountain pass to meet the same prophet. That detail alone tells you something about the quality of what Mus'ab bin Umair, whom the Prophet would dispatch to Medina as his missionary, would find waiting for him. The 12 men pledged their allegiance. The terms of the pledge were precise and practical, not abstract theology, but concrete behavioral commitments. We shall worship one God, associating none with him. We shall not steal. We shall not commit adultery. We shall not kill our daughters. We shall not slander. We shall not backbite. We shall obey the Prophet in everything good. 6 behavioral commitments and 1 political one. The Prophet was not asking for theological essays. He was asking for a community defined by a specific, observable way of living. As they prepared to depart, they asked the Prophet for a teacher, someone to go with them to Medina and continue what they had begun. The Prophet ﷺ sent Mus'ab bin Umair. Mus'ab bin Umair, let us stop here and give this man the attention he deserves, because his mission to Medina in the following year is one of the most strategically consequential individual deployments in this entire narrative. He was young. He came from a wealthy Qurayshi family. His mother had been so opposed to his conversion that she had bound him and tried to starve him into apostasy. He had emigrated to Abyssinia. He had returned. And now he was being sent, alone, as the Prophet's representative into a city the Prophet had never visited, to a community the Prophet had met for exactly 1 night in a rocky pass in the dark. He arrived in Medina. He stayed at the house of As'ad bin Zurara, and he began. The story of Mus'ab's first major encounter in Medina is a masterclass in how this message spread, not through compulsion, not through political pressure, but through a quality of engagement that simply could not be refused by an honest mind. Mus'ab bin Umair and the conversion of Sa'ad bin Mu'adh. Sa'ad bin Mu'adh was not merely a chieftain. He was the commander of all the clans of Banu Abdul Ashal, which meant he commanded the most powerful As tribal grouping in Medina. If Sa'ad bin Mu'adh accepted Islam, Entire neighborhoods would follow. He did not want to accept Islam. He sent his nephew Usaid bin Hudayr with a message. Go to As'ad bin Zurara and tell them in strong words that they are not to come into this locality to preach. Usaid went. He arrived where Mus'ab and As'ad were sitting and reproached them sharply. Mus'ab looked at him and said simply, "There is no harm if you sit down and listen to what I say. You are at liberty to decide afterward." Usaid sat. Mus'ab expounded Islam. He recited the Quran. And Usaid bin Hudayr, who had come to deliver a threat, said, "I accept Islam." He then told Mus'ab, "There is one man in this tribe that if he becomes Muslim, no one will oppose you. I will send him to you now." And he went back to Sa'd bin Mu'adh. "What did you say to them?" Sa'd asked. "They have promised not to do anything against your will," Usaid replied. And then, watching Sa'd relax slightly, added, "But a new incident took place there. Some men of Banu Haritha came wanting to kill As'ad bin Zurara. Sa'd bin Mu'adh stood up with his sword and strode to the spot, and saw Mus'ab and As'ad sitting peacefully with no incident of any kind. He realized he had been maneuvered. He turned on them angrily. "As'ad," he said, "the only reason I have not dealt with you harshly is because of our family connection. Otherwise you would not dare come here." Mus'ab, unintimidated, facing the most powerful chieftain in the Aus tribe who is holding a sword, said, "Please sit down and accept what I say, or reject it outright." Sa'd laid down his sword. He sat. Mus'ab spoke. Sa'd bin Mu'adh, chieftain and commander of Banu Abd al-Ashal, embraced Islam. He stood up and went back to his people. "What is your opinion of me?" he asked them. "You are our chief," they said. "Your opinion has always been worth practicing. Then I have nothing to do with you until you all accept Islam." The entire Banu Abd al-Ashal accepted Islam that day. Tribe after tribe, clan after clan. By the time the 13th year of the prophethood arrived, and Mus'ab bin Umair prepared to return to Makkah for the Hajj season, he came back not alone, but at the head of a caravan of 72 men and 2 women from Medina. 74 people making a 14-day journey to meet the Prophet and to invite him, formally and collectively, to come and live among them. The largest gathering of believers yet assembled, coming to Makkah to make a pledge. The second pledge of Aqabah, 73 men, 2 women, and the covenant that changed history. The 13th year of the prophethood, the nights of Hijra. The caravan from Medina had arrived for the Hajj. Among them were polytheists who traveled with the Muslims as part of the same tribal delegation. They did not know what the Muslims among them were planning. The meeting was to be held in total secrecy at the mountain pass of Aqabah in the middle of the night. The Prophet ﷺ came out with his uncle Abbas bin Abd al-Muttalib. Abbas was still not a Muslim, but he was the head of the Banu Hashim clan, and in the tribal framework he was the one responsible for the Prophet's safety. He wanted to see for himself what kind of covenant was being made and whether these people from Medina could actually deliver what they were promising. His presence was both protective and interrogative. Abbas spoke first. He addressed the people of Medina directly. "O people of Medina, Muhammad is at present under the protection of his family. Since you want to take him with you, keep in mind, you alone are responsible for his safety and security. His protection is not easy. Take him with you only if you are ready for a series of bloody fights. Otherwise, abandon this idea right now." This was not a welcome address. This was a challenge. Abbas was essentially saying, "You are asking to take a man who has the most powerful city in Arabia as his enemy. They will come after him. They will come after you. Are you actually prepared for that?" Bara bin Ma'rur rose and said, "We have heard what you said. Now we want the Prophet himself to speak." The Prophet ﷺ recited verses of the Quran. He laid out what he was asking of them, the rights of Allah, the rights of his slaves, and the specific weight of responsibility they would be accepting by inviting him to Medina. When he finished, Bara bin Ma'rur said, "We are prepared for all eventualities." Abu Haytham bin Tayhan stood, "O Prophet, but you must promise that you will not leave us and go back to Makkah." And the Prophet said, "I shall live and die with you." Abdullah bin Rawaha asked, "O Prophet of Allah, what shall we get in return?" The Prophet ﷺ replied, "Heaven and the pleasure of Allah." Abdullah bin Rawaha said, "Now the bargain is settled. There will be no going back on both sides." And then they pledged. Bara bin Ma'rur was first. 73 men and 2 women, one by one, gave their hand to the Prophet of Allah in the mountain pass at midnight, pledging their lives, their families, their city, their swords, to the protection and support of this man and this message. As'ad bin Zurara addressed them all when it was done. "O people, bear in mind this mutual agreement implies that we are prepared to face the entire world." Every voice answered, "Yes, we know very well that we will have to confront the entire world." At that moment, from the top of the mountain above them, a voice cried out into the darkness. The Prophet ﷺ identified it as a shaitan. The voice called out to the Makkans sleeping below, "O Makkans, Muhammad and his party are holding secret consultations against you." The Prophet ﷺ told his companions, "Dismiss it." They left the pass in ones and twos, maintaining secrecy. The Prophet ﷺ and Abbas returned to Makkah. By morning, the Quraysh had wind of a meeting. They came armed to the residences of the Medina delegation. The polytheists among the delegation, who genuinely had not been present and genuinely knew nothing, looked at the Quraysh with honest confusion. The Muslims were already gone. Sa'ad bin Ubadah was captured in the confusion, beaten, and dragged to Makkah. He was eventually freed through the protection of Jubayr bin Mut'im and Harith bin Umayyah, two Qurayshi nobles whose trade interests gave them reason to protect him. But the covenant was made. It could not be unmade. The strategic meaning of Aqabah. What just happened? Let us step back from the narrative and do what this channel exists to do. Apply the historian's lens to what we have just witnessed. The second pledge of Aqabah was not merely a religious ceremony. It was a treaty, a formal political and military covenant between a leader and a community, negotiated in secret, with specific terms, specific obligations on both sides, and specific consequences for violation. The Prophet's obligations: to come to Medina, to live and die among them, to not return to Makkah while they needed him. The Medina delegation's obligations: to protect the Prophet's Islam as they would protect their own children and women, to fight whoever fought him, to accept whoever he accepted, to reject whoever he rejected. The 12 proclaimers he appointed at the end of the meeting, 9 from Khazraj and 3 from Aus, were not merely community representatives. They were, in the tribal framework, guarantors. Their personal honor was pledged for their clan's fulfillment of the covenant. What this treaty accomplished, in pure strategic terms, was the following. The Islamic movement had been operating as a stateless community, a religious identity without territorial sovereignty, without a protected base, without the ability to organize militarily or economically on its own terms. Every gain it made was precarious because it had no ground of its own to stand on. The second pledge of Aqabah changed that. For the first time, the Islamic movement had a partner city, a physical territory, a population of people who had formally committed to its military defense, a base from which to operate that was outside the Quraysh's sphere of direct control. The Hijra, the migration to Medina, which is the subject of our next episode, is the operational execution of what was decided in the darkness at Aqabah. But the decision itself was made here. The city that would become the capital of the first Islamic state, the origin point of the armies that would defeat Persia and Byzantium, the place from which the message would go to every corner of the known world, that city said yes at midnight, in a mountain pass, to a man they had met for the first time a year before. And before I leave you with the horizon, I want to ask you something. The 12 proclaimers appointed at Aqabah. The Prophet compared them to the 12 disciples of Jesus, saying, "Like the partisans of Jesus, I assign you the responsibilities of educating your people." He was drawing the explicit line of continuity between this mission and every mission before it, not replacing those traditions, completing them. Does that framing change how you understand what happened in that mountain pass at midnight? Tell us in the comments. And tell us, if you had been in that Medina delegation, knowing that the Quraysh would come after you, knowing the costs, would you have pledged? The horizon, the assassination plot, and the night of departure. The Quraysh knew, not the details, not yet. But they knew that something had shifted. The man they had been trying to contain for 13 years was no longer merely a domestic problem. He had allies outside Makkah. He had a city willing to shelter him. He was about to leave. They convened in Dar al-Nadwah, the council house that Qusay had built centuries earlier as the seat of Makkah's governance. Every major clan sent its representative. The question before them was simple and existential. What do we do about Muhammad? 3 proposals were debated. The first, banishment. Drive him out of Makkah. The problem: if he goes to Medina with 74 supporters already waiting and armed, he becomes a military threat with a base. Banishment makes the problem worse. The second, imprisonment. Hold him until he dies in chains. The problem: Banu Hashim would spend the rest of their lives fighting to free him. The conflict would never end. The third, assassination. But not simple assassination. Whoever killed Muhammad would face the full blood vengeance of Banu Hashim, which meant that the killer's entire clan would bear the cost. No single clan would accept that. The solution they arrived at was a collective killing. One young man from every major Quraysh clan, each striking simultaneously, so that the blood of Muhammad would be on every clan's hands equally. Banu Hashim would not be able to demand vengeance from any single tribe. The most they could accept would be blood money, compensation, which the combined Quraysh could easily pay. It was, by the political logic of its time, a strategically coherent plan. But there was a problem they could not account for. And that problem was a revelation that came to the Prophet ﷺ before the assassins reached his door. He was told what was coming. He called Ali bin Abu Talib and gave him instructions. Sleep in my bed tonight. Wrap yourself in my green mantle. Return the trusts that people have left with me to their owners in the morning. Then migrate to Medina after me. Ali, without hesitation, said yes. He lay down in the Prophet ﷺ's bed and pulled the green mantle over himself. And the Prophet ﷺ, with the assassins already surrounding his house, waiting in the darkness for him to emerge for the Fajr prayer so they could cut him down, walked out of his house in the early hours of the night. He recited the opening verses of Surah Yasin as he walked. He threw a handful of dust toward the assembled assassins, and they did not see him. Not one of the armed men surrounding his house saw the man they were watching for walk past them. He went directly to Abu Bakr. They left through the back of the house. They took a route away from all main roads. 4 miles from Makkah, they climbed into the cave of Mount Thawr and sealed themselves inside. In the morning, the assassins burst into the Prophet's room. Ali bin Abu Talib looked up at them from the bed. They seized him, beat him, demanded to know where Muhammad was. "How can I know?" Ali said. "I was asleep the whole night. You should know his whereabouts since you were on guard." The most powerful city in Arabia, with 100 camels offered as a reward for Muhammad's capture, dead or alive, began its search. They sent trackers. They came within feet of the cave. A spider had woven its web across the entrance. A pigeon nested at the mouth. The trackers looked and turned away. "No one could have entered here," they said. "The web is unbroken. The eggs are undisturbed." Inside the cave, Abu Bakr said quietly, "O Prophet of Allah, if they look down at their feet, they will see us." And the Prophet ﷺ said with a calm that Abu Bakr remembered for the rest of his life, "Grieve not. Allah is with us. What do you think of 2 when Allah is their 3rd? They stayed in the cave for 3 nights. They waited. The search ebbed. And on the 3rd night, a guide named Abdullah bin Urayqit, a non-Muslim, trusted because of the Arabian code of personal honor, arrived with camels at the foot of Mount Thawr. The Prophet of Allah, with Abu Bakr beside him, mounted and rode north into the desert. 13 years in Makkah. Done. The Hijra was beginning. Next episode. The 8-day journey through the desert, the spider's web and the pigeon's nest, Suraqah bin Malik's pursuit and the Prophet's promise to him, the arrival at Aqabah and the building of the first mosque, the entry into Medina and the she-camel's choice, the constitution of Medina, the world's first pluralistic social contract, and the brotherhood that paired every muhajir with an ansar and erased poverty from the Muslim community in a single act. The question I want to leave you with: the Quraysh spent 13 years using every tool of a dominant power: ridicule, torture, economic siege, diplomatic pressure, and finally, a coordinated assassination attempt involving every major clan in the city. They had numbers, wealth, tribal prestige, and geographic control. And a man walked past them in the dark, and they did not see him. At what point, as a strategist, do you conclude that you are fighting something that cannot be fought by the means available to you? The Quraysh never reached that conclusion, and that failure of assessment will cost them everything. This is the House of Wisdom. The migration changes the theater entirely. We will see you at Aqabah.